It's been a while since I've talked about a video game on this channel. In fact, it's been so long that the last thing I did talk about was at the end of 2023 with the Phantom Liberty stuff in Cyberpunk 2077. Since then, I have sort of been on a hiatus when it comes to this, but I figured if any game can bring me out of that hiatus, if something can finally get me back into gaming much more, it would be something like maybe a Hideo Kojima game. So Death Stranding 2 on the Beach drops towards the end of June, and I spent the last few weeks playing it. And I figured, what better time is there to finally talk about a game again? I played the first one a few years ago. I got it during the middle of the COVID lockdowns, and I started playing it back then. That time I was still upgrading from a PS4 to a PS5, and so I was sort of in the, tail end of that one generation going into the next one. Eventually I finished the game when the director's cut was launched for Death Stranding, and that's when I wrapped up the story. And I really loved what that game did, and I thought that was a very fascinating narrative, albeit one that definitely takes its time to develop, which is not something that I have an issue with per se, because there's nothing wrong with letting a story sort of breathe. And even if something doesn't make sense for the longest time, eventually there is this concept of, patience sort of being a virtue, and that all your answers will come to you eventually. In the case of the first game, there were mysteries set up from the very first hour that weren't answered until the final hour of the game. And it made for an experience that I felt was ultimately quite rewarding, and that's why I was very excited to play the second game and see where the story would go from there. This takes place about a year after the events of the first game, and you follow Sam, once again played by Norman Reedus, with Lou, and everything seems to be going well between them. They're away from the UCA, they've cut ties entirely, and even though they're searching for him, they're completely off the grid. But Fragile does find him eventually, and eventually, because of events that take place, he is involved in a mission to help Fragile's new company, that being Drawbridge, in order to continue the work that Sam was doing in America, but expanding it now to Mexico, and then through that the continent of Australia, because in that sense they can create a larger network and really bring more people online in a world that is as disconnected as it's ever been. I'll go more into detail about why Sam is making deliveries and how, he's going out on his routes once again in a little bit. But before that, I just want to talk about the gameplay itself. It is very much like the first game, in that it very much takes, what was done in that game quite nicely and does expand upon it a bit more. It is faster than the first game, I will say though, because in the first game, some things are limited, and there are things that you cannot do, and it takes a while before you can maybe have a little bit more fun with things and, get a little more invested in the action and some of the more intense moments that the game has to offer. In Death Stranding 2, stuff like that happens pretty much out the gate. You're immediately running into situations where you might need to fight your way out of it, or you might have to deal with things that are becoming more and more dangerous, and the fighting and the combat, I think, has improved quite a bit. Sometimes it can still be a bit stiff, especially with melee combat. Like sometimes you can get close up and there are some moments where it can feel a little bit like that, but then later, as the game progresses and as you get better and better and your skills are much considerably improved, even that becomes a lot better. One thing that I think that the first game really did well though, which is much more in the second game, is the driving stuff. Like when you eventually get vehicles to go around with, like your tri-cruisers or those pickup off-roaders, like it's very smooth driving overall, and some of the distances that you cover when it comes to those things, like you can really get some really great rides with it. And when you eventually start to unlock more, like more battery powers, or when it comes to weapons on the truck, like machine guns or sticky guns to grab any cargo that's been dropped, I mean there are much more interesting things that you can do along with that. In fact, maneuverability and transport in general when it comes to Death Stranding 2 is improved over the first one. You have a lot more options here to do stuff. Either you'll have things already constructed, or you can work with things a lot quicker, or you could use, monorails and zip lines to get around a lot more, which is again, stuff that was in the first game as well, but it's just a lot more widespread this time around. And some of the fast travel options that unlock with the DHV Magellan as you're going around on that, those are also pretty convenient. They drop you off pretty close to where you need to get to, so that the journey after that, whether you want to make it in your own vehicle or if you want to just walk to wherever you got to get to in order to connect a place to the chiral network, it doesn't require too much effort past a point. That is, of course, if you're expecting to, get to places a lot quicker. If you want to just take your time, take in the scenery because the visuals are outstanding, then you could do that too. I want to talk about those visuals though. The gaming in this point of time, it really amazes me what you can do with some things, because there are many moments in Death Stranding 2, much like the first game, where I have a really hard time believing it's a game. It all looks so realistic. I mean, there is such a authenticity to everything that you're seeing, whether it's character interactions or whether it's basic travel. Like, just everything has this level of detail to it, which is remarkable. And that's something that comes throughout the entirety of the gameplay, whether it's in the cutscenes or whether it's in the brief interactions that you're having, or just the look and feel of things. It is wonderfully executed. There's a reason why games like Death Stranding 2, they take the time that they do, and I think at the end, the what you get is remarkable. I also like how quickly you can go around between weapons and the cargo that you're carrying. This time it happens a lot more quickly. For example, if you want to auto arrange your cargo because you feel like it's overloading you too much, you can do that with the left button, and you can just kind of circle around to auto arrange really quickly. It happens while you're moving. Otherwise, sometimes you had to do it by accessing the terminal. In this case, you can kind of have it all properly adjusted before any of that. And when it comes to accessing weapons as well, you can quickly switch between either an assault rifle or a shotgun or a machine gun, or the battle guitar that you eventually get, which is something that I had a lot of fun with once I eventually did get the battle guitar, which happens very much into the later part of the game. But getting to take on BTs with that, and eventually you also get this thing where you can summon BTs of your own with the EX grenade, which you can use to take out some of the BTs. There were times where I would launch it into battle, and so they would also help out in taking down a really big BT. Those were some really fun fight sequences, and it's just having a BT helper next to you as you're taking on something really menacing and huge that could crush you within a second, and then having that along with a weapon of your choice, that was also really cool. Some of the side quests that you also get too, I was a big fan of. I mean, there's some really entertaining ones over there. There's one where you're trying to solve the mystery of the headless rider, which eventually leads you into this track that looks like it's a level out of Tron or something like that, where you have to take on a bunch of ghost mech bikes which are being driven, and you have to take them out on this highway that's above the ground. It's a really cool level. The soundtrack over there is really good too. I do want to give credit to that soundtrack, by the way. I mean, Woodkid did the music for this one quite a bit. Loror did it previously, but then the lead singer of that passed away, unfortunately. There are still songs by Loror in the game, but the work that Woodkid did for the sequel was really great. And you juxtapose that with the score from Ludwig Forssell. Brilliant stuff. The musical landscape of this game, of Death Stranding in general, I absolutely love it. And it's such an integral part of things too. It doesn't just feel like it's there for, just the sake of it. The music is very much a part of the, franchise's identity. In the second one, especially so, because at the end of the first game, you're introduced to BB's theme, the lullaby. And that's become an integral part of stuff that you're listening to in DS2, because every now and then you're just going to hear it. I mean, Higgs, for example, knows the lullaby. And he has this very menacing version of it that he just keeps singing and singing at you, which makes things a little more eerie and terrifying. And driving along or walking around long distances with music sometimes playing, which is a feature that's been added in now, which is every musical track that you unlock eventually gets added to your music player that you can access through the ring terminal in the menu. You eventually get to listen to music as you're going along, which is something that I really like, because in the first game I don't think that there was an option for that, because I don't remember seeing that option, at least, where you could sort of play back a song if you wanted to continue on your journey. It would play in those moments where it was added in the game, and that's about it. But over here you actually get to revisit that, and it just makes those walks and those rides feel a little less like they're taking a long time, or there's a lot of bumps along the way, and just makes them feel a lot more leisurely and a lot more fun to do so. And that kind of slice of life aspect is something that I love about both the Death Stranding games. Sure, there's some aspects where it can feel a bit like you're walking around quite a bit, but I think there's a big difference between a walking simulator and the things that you can do while you're playing this game. Like, there's all kinds of other stuff that pops up along the way while you're doing your deliveries. There are new enemies and threats to deal with, and the BTs are evolving. So there'll be situations where unexpectedly you might run into something, and even with your Audra deck, even with the scanning that's going on, sometimes you'll just end up running into something. There's a couple of times where I ran into these massive BTs, and I'm like, okay, well, I got to deal with this now. And it's one of those things where sometimes if you're not very well equipped, you might be in some trouble, which is why I recommend, like, as many deliveries as you're making, make those connections stronger and stronger, so that you have more opportunities to fabricate weapons and to be able to carry more and to be able to upgrade your equipment, so that you're able to get more maneuverability, but also to be able to be more prepared. And when you're eventually in the the online mode, and when you're being able to connect with other porters, other users who are also playing the game, and sometimes they're offering you equipment, or you're creating greater connections with them, and someone will use a road that you've constructed, or you will use someone else's bridge or someone else's watchtower, and you'll be able to create something a lot stronger in the process by providing likes along the way. I love that feature of it, and just it creates this stronger bond with people who are all across the globe. Probably maybe you're using someone's bridge. Someone who's living thousands of miles away in the real world has created this, and now you're connected because of that one creation. That is something really, really cool, and I love the way that it's been used over here. So I mentioned earlier that there is a catalyst, an event that takes place that leads Sam back to doing what he's doing. And after Fragile arrives to see Sam, she finds him. When he's eventually sent around to parts of Mexico to connect different bases along the way by making deliveries and taking on orders. At one point in time, he gets an alert that there seems to be an attack happening at your shelter. And so you're trying to get back, but you are interrupted by ghost mechs. These red things that are popping out of the tar from below, and they seem to be firing at you, and you don't know who these guys are. And when you eventually get back to the shelter, you find Fragile there, injured, and you also find out that Lou is dead. Now, that's something that becomes a huge catalyst for things going forward, because Sam is trying to figure out what to do with this, because he is someone who has been raising Lou for a while now. I mean, the journey that they've been on in the first game created this incredible bond between them, and to have that shattered in a moment, and him being unable to save Lou, or just that Fragile couldn't save her as well. Like, there is something incredibly sad about that, and it leads Sam down this destructive path where he sort of wants to end it all as well, but he really can't, because as a repatriate, he can't really die. He'll just keep on coming back. And in order to sort of, make more use of what else he can do and sort of get back into the world, Fragile brings him into Drawbridge. And that involves connecting the UCA to Australia, but it's not necessarily working with the same parameters as whatever the UCA is trying to do or what Bridges was trying to do, but it's trying something a little more different. And when you finally do get to Australia and when you start connecting that continent, as you're going from one spot to another, from the initial bases all the way to like East Fort Knott, West Fort Knott, and so on and so forth, and you're meeting different people who are getting connected to the network, but also understanding how this continent has changed dramatically since the events of the Death Stranding. Some of the people that you meet are incredibly interesting. There's a lot of characters who are sprinkled in besides the main cast who we're rolling with, all of whom give really great performances. Norman Reedus as Sam I thought was excellent once again. I loved him in the first game. I think he's even better over here. There's a few moments with him that are incredible, and he does a fantastic job of bringing Sam to life, but also really capturing the side of Sam which is just very normal about things that are happening. Again, he's a repatriate, he can't really die, but he's also seen enough shit in that process to really kind of just go along with things. So every now and then a very bizarre thing will happen and he'll have the most deadpan, nonchalant reaction to it, like, yeah, okay, sure, big crab creature that's emerged from the tar. Okay, cool. And when it comes to the rest of the crew, Fragile, Léa Seydoux, I thought she was terrific. I actually think, this is something I'm going to say, I think there are ways that Léa Seydoux is used in both the Death Stranding games that I don't think a lot of movies sometimes tend to do. Some do, but there is great utilization of her acting talents over here with these games. I think in part 2, especially over here, she gets a lot to work with. I also really liked the characters who are returning, like Deadman, Guillermo del Toro. Well, his likeness, it was really great having Deadman back again. And when it comes to likenesses, Hartman, Nicholas Winding Refn, it's really great to see him over here too. And the character of Hartman still doing what he can to keep going back to the beach and try to find his family, and that's something that carries forward over here quite a bit. As far as the new characters go, I thought Tarman, George Miller, I thought that was really, really good, and I really liked Tarman's character as well. There's a story that you get to him when it comes to why he can operate the DHV Magellan and how he's, his hand is connected to the beach, and to how his son being lost in all of this is what's really guiding him and being able to guide the ship through the tar and through the currents. I thought he was a very interesting character, and I really like what he added to the story. My favorite of these has to be Dollman. I thought Fateh Akin, whose likeness has been used for this character, I thought he was really an interesting part of the game, and he is someone who's tagging along with Sam when it comes to everything that's going on. And he's someone who's just tied to your belt essentially and will just keep, having conversations with you, or if you need his help in situations, you can even launch him into the air and he will surveil the area to try and make sure that, it's clear and there's no hostiles around, and kind of get the feel of the place. And he's also someone who just keeps talking to Sam in general, like sort of, carrying him through like everything that's going on, but also trying to help him through some very difficult situations, really looking out for him. I really liked his dynamic over there, and his story even more tragic, like the idea of him losing his daughter because he wanted to fulfill his daughter's wish of being able to see her mother one more time, even though she had turned into a BT, and there was a very, very likely chance that she wasn't really there anymore. And the fact that that situation eventually gets them into a point where they're both attacked by other BTs, and their Ha and Ka are separated essentially. But then in order to have his daughter's Ka sort of move on to the next, to the afterlife and not be stuck on Earth with everything else, he sort of pushes her out, and he gets stuck in her doll. And that's how he ends up becoming Dollman. And I thought that story was really well told as well. It's something that comes up in the side stories that are happening, which is something that I can see being an issue for some people, because you don't always get those details as you're playing along. You have to sort of sit back and have more conversations and develop that connection along the way in order to learn more. And I think that it's something that you kind of run into when you're making a game as big as Death Stranding 2. There's so much I haven't even talked about yet, which I'm gonna get into in the video, don't you worry. But I did like those moments of conversation. I did like those interactions. And when you take the time with certain things, those connections that are built make the game a lot more worthwhile. Which is why I don't feel like you should rush into a game like Death Stranding 2. Take your time with it, really develop those, those interactions, and to really experience the world. And that's something that I do appreciate about it, this and the first game as well. And I like that a lot of these stories do play in parallel to Sam, the loss of a child, Tarman losing his son, Dollman losing his daughter, Sam just lost Lou, and he's also trying to come to some terms with that, even though he keeps seeing Lou in the pod. But I do like that the game sort of, plays sort of a fast one on you, because in the back of your head, you know that Lou's gone and that Lou's not really in the pod. And the game, for the longest time, every time you're on your trek and if you get into some trouble and Lou starts getting upset, you can comfort Lou. But you are also kind of aware of the fact that Lou's probably not there right now. Like, you're probably just talking to an empty pod. And eventually when that realization hits, that in Sam's grief and, just this idea of wanting to think everything was still going okay, Lou's not really there, that revelation when it comes through, it's like Dollman tells him, like, listen, the crew and I, we talked, Fragile told me not to really tell you because we decided to, go along with it until you were ready to accept it for yourself. But that it was going to be a tough process because you might not quite get there. But I like the fact that the game plays it in this very gut-wrenching way still. Like, it's still an incredibly sad moment when that realization does hit. Like, yeah, Lou is not there. But I think the places that that storyline goes to when it comes to characters like Higgs or Tomorrow, I think those particular pathways are really, really interesting. Let me talk about Higgs for a minute, because he's not dead. You played the first game, the end of that game, you found out that Fragile didn't really take the shot. She just kind of left him there on the beach for eternity. But he found his way out, and he is trying to exact revenge on Sam and Fragile for what happened. And so naturally he's on the warpath, and getting Lou away was kind of like part of the plan in a sense. And when he does show up, he's very different from what you remember in the first game. There is somewhat of a metal edge to him now. In fact, he even has a weapon, which is a battle guitar, where he can just strum it and he can fire projectiles from it and, use it as a flamethrower if he wants to. Very clearly inspired by Mad Max Fury Road. I mean, Hideo Kojima has been on record talking about how much he loves George Miller and his movies, and it's not surprising after that to see George Miller in the game, but then also have homages to movies that he's done before. Like, there's a part of the game where you have to walk through a sandstorm. I mean, it's already taking place in Australia, but you have to walk through a sandstorm and there's lightning bolts that are hitting as you're going through it. It very much looks like that scene out of Mad Max Fury Road, or even in Furiosa. You get a moment with the sandstorm, and the idea of the battle guitar almost feeling like this, Doof Warrior callback to Fury Road. I love the fact that those little tidbits are thrown in there. There's a lot of movie references that are sprinkled in here throughout, and I really like the fact that this game is so unabashedly committed to doing those things. And Troy Baker as Higgs is phenomenal in the game. I think he does an extraordinary job, and In some cases, I would say he's outperforming everybody else over here. I mean, he is a seasoned actor when it comes to video games. There's no shortage of the great stuff that this man has done when it comes to his career. Most people, I'm guessing, will know him for being Joel in the Last of Us games. And the Higgs that you see over here, seeing the conviction with which he's moving and this idea of vengeance driving him forward, but also this ideal that everything really should go straight to hell because he has known pain and suffering for a long time. It's completely shattered his psyche to the point that he kind of looks at everything going on and keeps wondering, like, why should anything be fought for? Why should their connections be made? Why should anything still have a chance to survive when it really feels like a cycle that keeps repeating over and over again, and it just creates more and more, carnage in the process. And there's almost a hint of believability to what he's doing, but also it's in the form of global annihilation of whatever is left on Earth, which is not something that anyone wants, at least if you're not a crazed maniac like Higgs. But to have him explaining that to Sam, there's this great monologue towards the end of the game where he just, conveys the fact that he's known this feeling of loneliness and pain. And Sam having to relate to some of that because as a repatriate, he has witnessed things along those lines. And to have that kind of, come in here and to create a way more compelling character arc for Higgs in the process, as someone who's just a villain who is trying to cause awful things to happen, to actually someone who has this, this genuine sense of tragedy to him. I think it makes for a very compelling thing, and I think Baker did a great job in the performance, and I think the writing for him in this game was really great. But also it has those funny moments where, he will do something which is very over the top, and you get that, performance out of him too, where it's like you can't help but kind of chuckle with it. There's even a point where he breaks the fourth wall, which I thought was really cool. It's things like that that are sort of, sprinkled in, which make Death Stranding 2 such a unique experience. There was, in fact, multiple moments where they just really break the fourth wall. A point where, Die Hardman just looks at the camera and tells you what the DHV Magellan actually stands for when he's trying to shut down what the president is trying to do, or how they're trying to manipulate things from the beach. And just that aspect of it I thought was really cool too. And since we're on the path of the more important characters, I also really like Tomorrow, Elle Fanning. You don't know much about her when she shows up. You're very much in the dark about her, actually. There are ideas as to who she could be. One of them is the most obvious one, where you're putting it together before Sam's putting it together. But I like discovering more and more about her along the way, and I thought Elle Fanning did a really good job. And some of the moments where she would show up as she was someone who could sort of, work with the tar and, fight off ghost mechs and stuff. She had these very insane moves because she's from a time which is within the tar currents where things seem to be already pretty dead. It's like the land of the dead where she's from. I thought what she was able to do was also really, really good, and I really thought her character went in fascinating places. I'll talk more about Tomorrow in a little bit. I'll get to her. I thought Shiori Katsuna as Rainy was wonderful as well. She was another one of my favorite characters in this one, the favorite new characters. I thought she did a wonderful job, and just seeing her character's tragedy, being as, someone who was ostracized for the fact that she could, make wonderful things happen with her powers, even though it was looked at as a curse by others. To see sort of the beauty come through that, like there's this healing capability to what she can do, and like literally bringing the rain, it's something that is really, really beautiful. Of course it's a time fall kind of thing, but it's like reverse time fall, where it's not destroying, it's rebuilding. Like there's a forest fire sequence very early on when you first meet her, and she comes in and on top of the DHV Magellan and she puts out the fire. And it's this beautiful moment, and she's able to do that a few times, but she's also able to heal others in the process of that. So if anyone is affected by timefall, like Fragile was, because of what Higgs was doing in the first game when he, pretty much tortured her like that, it's a very the beautifully realized characterization. I thought they did a great job there too. The couple of characters that I've been taking a while getting to, though, are the characters who you meet within the Tar, land of the dead and stuff. So in the first game, you meet Cliff Unger, Mads Mikkelsen, and he's got his, band of the soldiers who are around him, and, they're sort of commanding the entire place, and you get into fights with them, but eventually you learn more about his role in things and how this version of it isn't exactly a villainous one, it's a protective kind, like he's trying to do something over here. In the case of, in this game, you get Neil Vana, played by Luca Marinelli, who has a very similar thing. He's in this, particular world with, again, army of soldiers around him, and a look that definitely does not evoke another very famous Kojima character. But anyway, when he shows up, it's a very similar thing. He is firing at you, you're firing at him, and you both seem to be at odds with one another. But he also seems to know about the existence of Lou, which makes things a little complicated, because it's like, wait, I don't know how you know Lou. What connection do you have? And through those moments where you sort of jack into the BB pod and where you're able to see certain memories, you get little flashes of things very similar to how you saw flashes of Cliff in the first game. And because Dollman is also sort of connected, to all of this, Dollman can also see it. Which is something I liked, actually, because now you're also getting to have someone else to talk to about this. In the first game, you'd bring these things up and everyone would be like, what are you talking about? You were just gone for a few seconds. I mean, what do you mean you were in a completely different, point of time in the world? But because Dollman is with you now, it's like, I can attest to the fact that whatever he saw, I also saw. We're in a place where there are fireworks going on and the whole place is on fire and everything is, falling apart and we're having these fights. There's one point where we're underwater, don't know what that's about, but we're stuck over there. And there are points where we're, in this collapsing structure train station, and we're again having fights. It's like, just to have someone else sort of go along with you on this, and all the while trying to get closer and closer to Neil Vana and understanding how he has something to do with this was incredibly fascinating. And it's not until closer to the end of the game that you start to understand more. When the Death Stranding began, the land of the dead that you were seeing earlier with the BTs roaming around and people like the souls of the dead sort of running through was his childhood. And it was something that was, a haunting memory to him. And in a situation where he thought he'd be in trouble, he was saved by a girl. That girl, many years later, ends up being Lucy, who is Sam's wife, and she's also the therapist who is talking with Neil. And that's something that reforges their connection. In the chaos of it all, he believed that Lucy had died when that whole thing was going down, that situation, because he ran, he heard his parents, and he thought he'd left her in the rubble. And to have her essentially then show up later on, years later, with the same burn mark that he had on his hand, it's on her hand too. That moment of recognition. And through these therapy sessions, you learn that Neil was someone who was another porter, and that he was taking on jobs that was essentially smuggling in people from across the border, people who essentially were women, pregnant women, and that they were going to be used in experiments that Bridges was doing essentially when it came to expanding the network, but that there was a potential for someone really special to come along to, make all of that viable. In this case, it unfortunately could be Lucy, because she's pregnant with Sam's baby. And Hartman discovers this years later, that idea that, they tried to make this program happen, but that there was a BB00, and, that didn't really work out. And so it was, left in storage. And it turns out that BB00 was going to be this baby that Lucy was going to have. And in the process of trying to, stage an escape where Neil could potentially get her across the border and keep the child safe, they do get caught, and Lucy unfortunately gets killed in the crossfire, and so does Neil. But they're able to extract the baby. However, Neil's body begins to decompose and it triggers a void out. It also makes a lot of things make sense when it comes to what you've been seeing with Neil Vana this whole time. It's only until the final confrontation that you have with Neil Vana where, when you finally are able to stop him for a second, he goes, "Are you Sam? Like, you need to keep Lou safe." And that here's a thumb drive which has all the answers as to what's going on, which essentially gives you all the information about what Lucy is, sort of going through. I thought the portrayal from Marinelli was really good, and I thought he did a great job as the character. And even though you get some brief moments with him throughout the game, he did really, sell me on Neil and what he was going through. And I thought Alyssa Young as Lucy, I thought she was really good too. That final act is something special though, because it's also predicated on, getting answers as to who Tomorrow is and whether or not all the connections can be made across Australia, and having that entire final battle eventually take place where you're starting to learn about the true intentions of all of this. The fact that you've been talking to the new president of the UCA, and it turns out that there are more nefarious, things at play when it comes to connecting Australia and to take it forward, essentially planning the fact that there will be a mass extinction of humanity anyway, and that it should happen. Like, just having that be foiled at first by Charlie, who is the ship's, the mystery man on the ship, who seems to be talking to Sam about all of his missions but doesn't really have a face, is essentially this mannequin head with like an LED sort of display that just has some expressions every now and then. Having that essentially be Die Hardman, and sort of coming in and be like, "Oh, I've been ahead of this whole thing the entire time," and then having Higgs come into the middle of that, like, "I've also been sort of puppeteering this whole thing from the start," and how he needs Tomorrow in order to trigger the Last Stranding. That entire reveal then being predicated around the fact that Tomorrow is in fact Lou. That is something that I think a lot of people would have expected to happen, and it did, and that revealed surprising Sam as well. But then launching into the final battle on the beach where you're having to fight Higgs, and you have the DHV Magellan taking on the other, large BTs, eventually integrating with one in order to have this kaiju battle happen, while you're fighting with Higgs through these, data banks of, the souls who are trapped on the beach, and then eventually having a fight with the battle guitars that you have. It's the most metal shit that you could think of. It is exhilarating stuff. And another movie reference here, I'm guessing that Kojima was a big fan of The Northman, because the entire final fight really feels like it's taken from that volcano battle at the end of that movie. You can see this massive, opening up this rift where Tomorrow is in the middle, and it could trigger the Last Stranding if it was able to come through. And, this entire situation taking place with the music, reaching this massive rock, ballad crescendo. It's incredible stuff. And that eventually leading to this final confrontation where it seems like Lou is back and she kills Higgs for good this time. And Lou coming back to Sam in the form of Tomorrow. But there's a cost to it, because as you see, the reveal eventually ends up being that day when Lou was apparently killed and you had no idea where Lou was gone, Lou was fine, but Lou was taken to the place within the tar to, be taken care of until it would be time to eventually release her, until Sam came. And essentially Fragile died, but there was enough of her ka that stuck around, just enough that she could go on this journey with Sam and spend the last few moments or whatever there is with him. And so she's on this journey with you, but she can't really remember what's happened until it starts to reach her when she gets to the beach. and then she dies. So there is this sacrifice moment, and it's incredibly sad because, you've lost Fragile. But she's still kind of around. Like, there is her presence sort of lingering over the entire thing still. But it does end on that happy note of Sam and Lou, or tomorrow, being united once again. And there is this hopeful ending for what will potentially happen next. Seeing this entire story all the way to the end, while also doing all the side quests along the way, the other deliveries that you're doing, it all leads to this really incredible narrative that I haven't stopped thinking about since I played it. It's been about a few days now since I got done, and it's been on my mind since, and I wanted to talk to you guys about it. I know this video is going incredibly long, and there's so much that I've said in this amount of time, but I really just adored Death Stranding 2 on the beach. I think it's an incredible game, and it's a phenomenal achievement from Kojima and co. I am very excited to see what the future will be with whatever he ends up doing next, whatever his next game will be. I think he's making one for Xbox next, which should be interesting. But I love this game, and I highly recommend it. And I do implore giving it the patience, giving it some time. So guys, thank you very much as always for watching. I know I've spent a lot of time already, so I should probably just wrap this up over here and get going. There's a lot of other things that happen in Death Stranding too, so if I missed something, let me know about it in the comments below. Very interested to hear what you guys think about it, if you've played the game as well. If you haven't, I'm sorry I just spoiled it all for you. I just had a wonderful time talking about this. As always, if you like this, guys, please do subscribe. Thank you very much as always for watching, and hope you guys enjoyed the game.